Lou. Well, probably. I think it'll be hard to avoid it. But but I also talk about what the Democrats are doing wrong too. Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Did they? They are the ones who are responsible for Kevin McCarthy being out and Mike Johnson being in. Because yes, right. So they're just as partisan as Republicans. What? She did. I saw it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2024 Matsui Lecture, Congress and the Crisis in American Democracy, a conversation with former Member of Congress Mickey Edwards. We are so glad that you are all here today to join us for what's going to be a fascinating conversation. My name is Christine Trost. I'm director of the Robert T. Matsui Center for Politics and Public Service, which is based at the Institute of Governmental Studies here at UC Berkeley. The Matsui Center is a living legacy to Robert T. Matsui, who served in Congress for 26 years representing the Sacramento area. And he was renowned for his substantive policy accomplishments as well as the bipartisan efforts and spirit that he brought to his work in Congress. The Matsui Center honors Congressman Matsui's legacy through its commitment to nurturing the next generation of public service leaders who represent the diversity of our state and nation, many of whom are here today. Please raise your hands if you're a student here at UC Berkeley. Fantastic. We also do this by engaging Cal undergrads in fellowships, in research opportunities, in training, in mentorship, and experiential learning programs such as public service internships at local, state, and federal levels of government, and just finding ways to prepare them for careers in public service. And we also honor his legacy by holding events like this one, where we bring a distinguished guest to the Berkeley campus for several days for dialogue and discussion and understanding on critical issues facing our communities and our nation and the world. The Matsui Lectureship was established with the goal of promoting bipartisan discussion. And every year we invite a distinguished former member of Congress to campus, alternating each year between Democrat and Republican, liberal and conservative. And we invite them to meet with students and faculty and alums and community members, to speak in classes, to share their perspectives, to tell us what's on their hearts and minds, and participate in a major public event like this one on critical issues of the day. So in this presidential election year, which is marked by significant challenges facing our state, our nation, the world, and along with a national political context that is dominated by hyper-partisanship, by increasing polarization, it is more essential than ever to keep the lines of communication open, to hear from people we may or may not agree with, and to create and protect spaces for bipartisan dialogue and discussion. And that's what this is. So this year, we are honored to welcome our 14th Matsui Lecturer, Representative Mickey Edwards, who, it should be noted, was a colleague of Bob Matsui, and they overlapped by 14 years in the House serving together. We have put Representative Edwards to work over the last 2 days. He has been incredibly kind and gracious and generous with his time throughout his visit. He has spoken to multiple classes. He has met with dozens of students, faculty, and alums. He's shared with us his expertise, his insights, his wisdom, along with his hopes and dreams for our country and our democracy. And we are deeply appreciative, Representative Edwards, that you would take the time out of your spring break from Princeton to join us here at Cal and to go deep into the Cal community and get to know us better and allow us to get to know you better. I'm grateful to IGS co-director Eric Schickler for agreeing to facilitate today's conversation. In addition to co-directing the Institute of Governmental Studies with Professor Christina Mora, Eric is the Jeffrey and Ashley McDermott Professor of Political Science at UC Berkeley. Eric is an expert in American politics with a focus on the U.S. Congress, American political development, political parties, and polarization. He has many award-winning books on the development of the U.S. Congress, the use of the filibuster in the U.S. Senate, presidential power, and racial realignment in the U.S. And he just completed a new book with Paul Pierson on the nationalized polarization that has arisen in the U.S., and that's going to be out in the fall. The format for this event is for Professor Schickler to engage Representative Edwards in conversation for about the first 30 minutes, after which we will invite questions from all of you. And so if you would like to ask a question, please write it on a note card. I already have one, very excited. And pass it to the end of the row. We'll have staff collecting them, and we'll get them up here to Professor Schickler, and we'll try to ask as many of your questions as possible. Immediately following this event, we're going to host a reception in the atrium right outside these doors, and we encourage you to stay and join us to continue the conversation. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Doris O. Matsui, who will introduce Representative Edwards. Congresswoman Matsui has served Congress for 19 years, representing the Sacramento area. She has served as a senior member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee and provided leadership on a host of critical policy issues related to climate, technology, affordable health care, economic development, clean energy, and much, much more. She was also the force behind the establishment of the Matsui Center, and she continues to be a strong and generous supporter and a vital source of vision and leadership and encouragement and support for the important work that we do. Although Congresswoman Matsui is not able to join us in person today due to Congress being in session, and one of these days we're going to schedule this Matsui lecture so that it does not conflict with the congressional schedule. She was kind enough to share a video greeting welcoming all of you and also introducing Representative Edwards, and we will show that now.
Hi everyone, it's wonderful to welcome you to the 2024 Matsui Lecture. As an alum, Cal holds a special place in my heart, and I have so many great memories. This is where I met my late husband, Bob Matsui, and this is where both of us once sat in those chairs, listening to others tell us how we were the future leaders that our country needed. Now, if you knew Bob, you knew he held an unshakable belief that there was nothing more fulfilling than serving others. He inspired so many to pursue public service, including me. And through the Matsui Center here, I know he will continue to do so for generations to come. Bob truly loved coming back here, speaking to the students and challenging them to dream big, work hard, and help others. I can say that it brings me that same joy. Those of you who are taking the time to be here today are the ones willing to engage in open discourse. Now, more than ever before, we must approach the political climate with an open mind and civility. We must seek a greater understanding of the world around us. Now that is why this annual lecture series and the work of the Matsui Center is so significant. Today, you're going to hear from an accomplished public servant, political leader, author, journalist, and professor, former Congressman Mickey Edwards. During his 16 years in Congress, Congressman Edwards understood the importance of crossing the aisle to help those in need throughout the country. I hold a great deal of respect for Congressman Edwards, as did Bob Matsui. Mickey Edwards continues to work hard to push us to have important conversations, listen to each other, and work towards genuine progress. With that, please join me in offering a warm welcome to Congressman Mickey Edwards. Mickey?
Turn on a mic. It's complicated. Which one do you want?
Either one's all right with me. This. All right. Well, welcome, Congressman Edwards.
Thanks.
It's great to have you here and great to see this audience today, some of which are students of my own Congress class. And so I guess I want to start out, we talk a lot about a crisis in American democracy and in the American constitutional system. I know this is something you've thought about quite a bit, and I think a good starting point, though, is to maybe think a little bit about, what do you see as the kind of core principles of this constitutional system, and how do those principles connect up to the project of defending liberal democracy?
Well, thanks, Eric. First, I want to just say a couple of things. Anybody who's got anything at all to do that is important to you and needs to be done, you should try to get Christine Trost away from the school and have her do it for you, because she can do anything. And what she has done with the Matsui Center is terrific. Little scary to do this because my wife is here, my nephew and his wife are here, one of my former students from Harvard is here, so I have to walk very carefully because they all are going to say, but I remember when you said that instead of this. Look, I had a part in choosing what the title of this was going to be, and we do have a very difficult moment right now in America. We've had some difficult moments in our history, but this is a serious one. Our system it's this really strange marriage of democracy and liberalism. Liberalism, the republic part of it, the limitations on what democracy can do in honor of protecting the rights of individuals, and there's this tension, and the people who are in the majority in the public generally see problems. Not everybody agrees what the problems are, but people see the problems and they want them fixed, and they're eager for government to do something about it, which is why we elect people to Congress and other offices. And when you reach a point that you have people in the system who are so full of partisan anger that they lose the ability to talk to each other, to work with each other, to respect each other's views, you undermine the very basis of our system, which is deliberative democracy. It's about people coming together. And I've said this, and sometimes, as Eric knows, I can be pretty direct. And I have said, some people here have been in classes I've spoken to, and I've said we got a lot of people in the country who want to protect their ears against hearing ideas that they don't like. And when I teach at Princeton now, and I teach a leadership course. And part of what matters is understanding that somebody, if you're on the left and somebody who disagrees with you is not a fascist. And so if you're on the right and somebody who disagrees with you is not a communist. There are 340 million Americans. And we all have multiple when you talk about identity, we all have multiple identities, multiple things about our experiences and our color and our ethnicity and our religion and so many other, whether you're from California or from Oklahoma or wherever. And one of the things, Eric, that is a real threat at the moment is the difficulty about getting Americans to talk to each other as one country that is going to work together to solve the many, many complicated problems that we've got. So that's one of them. Another one, and I tread very carefully here because not only is Eric a political scientist, there are other political scientists here, and my wife is a political scientist, but one of the things that has happened, if George Washington, if there's really such a thing as rolling over in your grave, George Washington would be doing it in seeing, because his farewell address was saying, don't create political parties. Well, I think there's a role for political parties. We've created them, but we've also put them now in complete charge of our system. So that, if I can run through some numbers, because this is a root cause, a systemic problem. In 46 states, in 46 of our 50 states, you have a closed primary of one kind or another, where you get to choose among a limited set of people in your club, and other people can choose in their club. And there's a term that's used, is that whoever wins is first past the post. But the post, I'm a baseball fan. The post is home plate. But the way we've got our political system, if you get to first base, you score a run. Because you got 22% of the vote, somebody else got 21%, you win, and you go on. Now, you could have a runoff to ensure that at some point, somebody got a majority, right? The majority rule, that's what we believe in. But 46 states have the problem with the closed primaries. 40 states don't have runoffs and elect people who never got, we have no idea what the majority of the people in that state want. Because in that you get advanced through your party primary. And if you are in Massachusetts, where we have a home, or if you're in Oklahoma, where I used to have a home, Oklahoma is a heavily solid Republican state, and Massachusetts a solidly Democratic state. And if you got 22% of the vote, and that makes you the quote winner, then you get to be the only person in your party on a state where you're going to get elected. And then again, there's sore loser laws, and I won't get into that, where if you kind of lost your primary, but you are the most popular person in the country, in the state, you still can't run. So that's a problem. We have problems in the way we elect our representatives, our governors, and so forth. So that's part of it. And the last thing I'll say about the problem, we have, and the importance of what I just said is that our Congress today is made up of people who, because they worry about that primary system and getting defeated in the primary system, because I'm not just throwing it out to be a political commentator, it's that you are afraid of losing your seat in a primary by a small number of very dedicated, zealous partisans, and then if you don't want to lose your seat because you want to earn a living, or because you have things that you want to accomplish, or you think the person who would succeed you is worse, then you will do what you need to do to answer to the small number of people in the primary. So that's a problem. We have, in addition, the problem of, over the years, and I'm going to start with a solution too, because Eric's involved in this. Over the years, our system, which is based on equal powers, separated powers, between the executive, and the legislative and the courts, it's disappeared. Because as people see themselves as Republicans first, or Democrats first, or whatever else, things like the separation of powers between Congress and the executive disappear. Because if you are a Democrat and the president's a Democrat, you want what you want, and the democratic deliberative process of debating and compromising and working through the legislative goals, That's too complicated. It takes too long. Why can't we have somebody just declare it? Why can't we have edicts? Henry VIII would do it. Why can't we have somebody at the top who does? And so people lose faith because it takes time in a democracy, a deliberative democracy, to solve your problems. People get very impatient. And over the years, and it's not tomorrow or yesterday, go back to Harry Truman taking us to war without approval by Congress. So we have, over the years, increasingly moved away from the separation of powers. So one of the things that I did, now most universities have all kinds of things that happen within the faculties. Most universities do not actually take a position on a big issue. Princeton has. At my instigation, Princeton University has created an initiative to restore the constitutional powers of Congress, the People's Branch. And for those of you who say, but my God, look at the Congress today, the answer is, but you don't know who's going to be the Congress tomorrow. And any power you give to the president today will belong to the next president who you may not like. That's the way it works. So what we've done is set up a system, and I've put together 36 people. I'm doing this now because Christine always says, tell them what the solution is. We've got 36 people, including former members of Congress, Democrat and Republican, liberal and conservative, working on this, and professors from 19 universities, including Eric Schickler, working on this, to propose actionable ideas to Congress about how to legislatively take back its constitutional powers and to change the behaviors in Congress so that people in Congress understand that they're not members of the president's staff. They are the Congress, the elected representatives of the people. So those quickly, sorry, Eric, to go on, but we have these crises, and at the moment, politically, we are in danger of losing our democracy in a lot of different ways. And so we can get more into that, but that's why I bring this up.
Yeah, thanks so much. You've raised a lot of important issues. I guess I want to maybe step back a little bit and get to this point, or talk a little bit more deeply about this point about Congress. And, one thing, Americans have always disliked Congress. There's always been concern about it. But I think it's fair to say there have been periods where it operated better and periods where it's operated less well. Right. And this would seem to be a less well period. Often when I think about, when was it functioning reasonably well in balancing majority rule, minority rights in a reasonable way, sometimes do you think about the 1980s, which is the period you were serving? And so far from perfect, lots of problems, but very different from today.
Yeah.
And I'd just be, you served obviously in the minority. You were a Republican in a Democratic House of Representatives. Maybe just get a sense for what was that like? Did you feel like you had opportunities to influence policy? To what extent were you able to work with folks from across the aisle? And how did those kinds of exchanges work in practice in that era?
So there's two parts to that. One is how do you work with them, and then how did the process work in those days? I'll use a couple of examples. First of all, there were people who disagreed with me. We had very strong divisions, and Democrats, when I was there, and I was a Republican. I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent, but I was a Republican. And in those days, we were badly outnumbered, sometimes 100 more Democrats than Republicans. I was used to that because my district that I got elected in was 74% Democrats, so I was kind of used to that. So we had friendships across the aisle. We talked, my best friends were Democrats, and that was fairly common. But there were also, let me give you a couple of things I did that had practical effects. How many of you have seen Killers of the Flower Moon? How many of you read the book? So I represented the Osage tribe. And the thing in the book and the movie is about an earlier time when whites tried to and were killing, actually, Osages in order to get their land. So move forward years later, and I assume, being Californians, that you're basically environmentalists, and I think I am. My wife and I love to go hiking, go up in the mountains, love nature. And in the area in northeastern Oklahoma where the Osage tribe lived was something called the Tall Grass Prairie Preserve. Beautiful, beautiful. It's just like in the 1800s when the cowboys were and people with the wagon trains going through that area. Beautiful, and the environmental groups decided that they wanted to turn this into a federal preserve. Well, who is not in favor of a federal preserve? The only thing is, when there was a federal preserve, there are certain things you cannot do. So you've got the roads there that the small ranches and the small farmers used. But and there was oil, this is not oil country, there are a few oil wells. And the Osage tribe lived off of, a very poor tribe, lived off of the mineral rights that they had by treaty. By treaty. They owned the mineral rights. And the well-meaning environmentalists, wanted to turn that into a preserve. It would have destroyed the Osages. I was the only Republican in my delegation, and I was able to intervene. I spent 2 years drawing maps to reach a compromise way that you could both preserve the land, the tallgrass prairie, and also allow these other things to go on. And we did it, and took it as soon as it was introduced, and all of the delegation, all Democrats except me, supported me in doing this, and took it to the committee. Immediately the Sierra Club decided, they notified all their members, now start writing letters in to tell them to change it back to the original plan. So I pulled the bill, and all of the Democrats in the delegation did it. We stood together. So the other one, and I'll be very fast on this one, there was a foreign policy issue, and it doesn't matter what it was, and I'm not going to mention what it was because my wife gets mad at me every time, but because she's on the other side. But it was a foreign policy issue, and I offered an amendment to it. This was during the Reagan-Bush years. I offered an amendment which the Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, strongly objected to. Speakers never take the floor, but he took the House floor to condemn my amendment. All of the Democratic leadership took the floor to condemn my amendment, and I won. Even though they had 100 more members, I won. And what happened, Eric, was because you did not get pilloried if you voted away from your party. So Democrats came over and voted with me, and my hero, I am not the hero. The hero was the Democratic Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, who said, he's an institutionalist. I don't like what you're proposing. I think it's bad, but I will not deny you the right to offer the amendment and to have a debate about it and have a vote on it. That's the way Congress used to work. And it changed. It started changing when Newt Gingrich, took over and changed everything. So instead of going from the bottom up, subcommittee discussions about issues and compromises, then the full committee, then the floor, now it all comes down from the top. It doesn't matter whether the speaker is a Democrat or the Republican. It's we decide what it is, and we're going to tell you this is our policy. And if you don't go along with the policy, there's going to be a front-page story about how you can't hold your party together and that these people are terrible because they're not loyal to their tribe, and so. But in those days, Eric, to answer your question, it worked, and it worked largely because of people like Tip O'Neill, who said, we have the power, we have the votes. But this is Congress, and we have debates and votes, and we consider issues regardless of whether we favor them or not. And that was a big difference.
Yeah, it's a striking story, really interesting. And so I guess one question, and this is a sort of, I mean, so you put a lot on Gingrich, and
Yeah.
I think that's
Not nearly enough.
So what was it? I mean, you were there when he was a junior member, rising through the ranks. You weren't there when he was speaker. I mean, what allowed Newt Gingrich? Why did this happen? And why did he become a kind of dominant voice among Republicans in Congress and got that capacity to kind of help reshape it?
Yeah, I was in the leadership with him, and before he became whip, and opposed him, and he just barely got elected whip by 2 votes. So I was saying, and I apologize to some of you, I was saying to my friends over here, my new friends, that there's blame on both sides. It's not just one. I mean, right now I think the Republicans are getting a little scary, but there's blame on both sides. So let me tell you what happened. Tip O'Neill retired, which was a terrible thing to have happen. And he was succeeded by Jim Wright from Texas. Jim Wright was not a bad guy. He wasn't, and personally. He had strong beliefs. He had a strong belief in liberal democratic ideas, many of which, I would have agreed with. But Reagan and Bush had a pretty, remember Reagan carried 49 states. People now look at, the Reagan year. Well, he was pretty damn popular. And what happened was that when Wright took over, he understood that Reagan was so popular, and Bush then inherited that if he allowed his fellow Democrats to vote on Republican proposals that the president supported, they would be afraid to vote against it because that's what their constituents wanted. And so he did the ultimate crime for Congress. The ultimate crime for Congress. He instituted closed rules, which said, we will determine whether or not you can offer any amendments at all, a closed rule, or only 2 or 3 amendments that we handpick and say that you can offer, and we'll give you 5 minutes to make the argument, and basically shut it down. And I haven't forgotten your question.
No.
So what happened was, people on the Republican side, understanding that they were the minority, but believing that they were members of Congress who were entitled, every one of them was representing 500,000 people, and that they were entitled to be heard and to have the arguments that were favored by their constituents to be heard. And so they were getting really angry. And so they said, we have to fight back. We have to fight against this. And who was the absolute meanest son of a bitch they knew? It was Newt Gingrich. And so if you actually look back at how Gingrich got to be the whip, he was supported by the moderates, because the moderates were the ones who wanted to be players. They wanted to be able to, they had issues they wanted addressed. They wanted to be real members of Congress, with trying to represent their constituents, and they wanted somebody to fight back. And that's what happened. Now, it turns out that Newt set about changing things dramatically and in a very bad way, and it has persevered ever since. To this day, both parties operate from top down, and here's the party agenda, and you're expected to adhere to it. And we pay a price for that. But that was the story about Newt Gingrich. That's how he came off the back bench, because he was the guy who would stand up to Jim Wright and fight back.
So here we are now, and there's a question of, well, what could be done to improve or change this situation? And then maybe parenthetical to that, do you see the current, dysfunction in the House of Representatives and maybe potential fraying of or weak, the problems that Republican leaders are having as creating an opportunity for some change in terms of where we've been going, or do you expect it just to lead to more of the same?
Well, the one thing that gives me some optimism, and first of all, I've got to say, I haven't totally abandoned, the things that made me a Republican in the first place, and that is Congress is not necessarily dysfunctional if it hasn't passed 40 bills a week. That's not the real measure of what they're doing. But I have some measure of hope. Now, it's not the majority of my feeling, but I have some measure of hope by the fact that I know so many of the current members of Congress, including Republicans and Democrats. And people have asked me, why are members of Congress so stupid? Well, I guarantee you, maybe with the exception of the faculty here, members of Congress are among the best educated, brightest people you'll ever meet. They are like Bob Matsui and Doris Matsui. That's not uncommon. But so the system causes them to do things that they wouldn't do otherwise. But the fact that most members of Congress are sane, thoughtful, considerate, caring people who want to solve problems. They disagree about they disagree about how to define the problem. They disagree about what the cause of the problem is, and they disagree about what's the right solution. But we're 340 million people. So I have some hope in the character of most of the members of Congress. The problem is that my old party has fallen under the spell of they've become a cult. They've become a cult. Not because I think that all their ideas are bad. If I were in Congress, I'd still vote for some of the proposals they have, maybe a lot of them. But they are now under the spell of a leader who has no regard for democracy, has no regard for the rule of law, has no regard for separation of powers. It is terrifying to think of what he is proposing to do to make the federal agencies from the Justice Department on down, and Defense Department, all of it, just answerable to him as president, instead of the honorable federal employees who are nonpartisan working to carry out the laws. And so that has me worried. And it also worries me a little bit about some of the people. I will tell you, I have a range of views on things. I am very conservative on some. I'm very liberal on some. I have lots of mixed views. Some people have such a strong feeling. So I heard on television the other day a woman who was quite angry about some stuff that Biden was doing. And she's not alone. And felt so strongly about the issue that she was talking about that she and her friends were not going to vote for Biden. And the reporter said, well, but aren't you afraid of Trump? And she said, well, okay, so we'll put up with Trump, and then maybe we'll win next time. And my first thought was, how are you going to get him out of office? He wasn't willing last time to obey the results of an election. I don't have confidence he would again if he lost. And so what we have here is a problem where the unwillingness to stand up against this looming danger, in my opinion, is something that people who have a disagreement with the president over even an issue that they care a lot about need to, damn it, get over it. Because I'm a consequentialist. What you do has consequences. And if you just say, I'm going to feel good because I'm going to fall on my sword for this cause or that cause, and the result of it is the destruction of American democracy, you're to blame as well as the other side. And so I guess you were looking for, how do I feel positive? I feel positive because I think there are enough good members of Congress in both sides that at some point they're going to rise up and say, we're not going to do that. We're not going to go there. But you worry about it. You worry about it. Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell both said, that he was responsible for an insurrection and then, fell in line. McConnell has just endorsed Trump. And I want to say my opposition to Trump is not because of his particular economic policies or whatever. In some ways, his economic policies are better than Biden's. So the problem is, that it's the things that make American democracy, liberal democracy. Fareed Zakaria wrote a book on this. It's not democracy we believe in, it's liberal democracy with the protection of the rights of the people. I think, Eric, it's really scary. So I will give you the positive that you asked for, but I would say more than that, I'm worried. I am worried about what might come out of this election.
Thank you. Maybe I'll do one more and then we'll get some questions from the audience. So you've been critical of our party system quite a bit. I mean, what could be done about it? Or, how could we improve this part? Are there reforms we could adopt that would address some of these problems?
Well, actually, yes. You have no idea how many, maybe you would, but how many movements there are and how many organizations I'm part of that are working on all kinds of different approaches to change the system that we're in. One of the movements is open primaries. You guys are lucky here. You're in California. This is the system that works. You may not like who gets elected, you may like, but the open primaries where the voters are trusted enough to be able to choose among all of their options and those kind of things. Some people are promoting ranked choice voting. I personally think it's a bad idea. I don't like it because you never get to. They got this crazy idea at the end that you'll have a 5-person runoff, which is like just doing the original thing all over again, and you still don't have a majority. But fusion voting, which is popular in New York, people are proposing that. The majority of the largest party now are independents, and I've been told, and it's correct, that independents may be less engaged than people who are registered by party, but they're gettable. They're gettable, and they don't want to be part of the party clique. They don't want to do this, and so. There are these reforms. So Bernie Sanders, bless his heart, is an independent. Kirsten Sinema is an independent. I wrote her a note yesterday. I know her very well. She's smart as hell. She really is. And I wrote her a note and said, good for you. You're getting attacked every day because you don't march in lockstep. You say, when you're in Congress, your job is only 3 things. Only 3. What do your constituents want? You don't have to obey them. You don't have to obey them, but you have to give a lot of attention to their concerns. The second is the Constitution of the United States. What does it allow? And the third is your conscience. What's the right thing to do? And if you go to Washington and you turn off your brain and say, I'm going to do whatever my party leader tells me to do, that you are betraying your oath of office, you're betraying your moral standards, you become a member of a clique. And so it may be that Republicans aren't the only cult. Maybe there's several cults out there. And so I think that if you look at it, when you look at the people with pushing to back against this, open primaries gives a voice for independents, gives them an outlet. The idea of fusion voting, where you can get the endorsement of more than one party and others. There's a real push now to try to change the system, and I think that can happen.
Great.
So.
I think they're still organizing the question, so maybe
Yeah.
I'll ask another one. Okay. So I guess with any, one could say that, any reform has unanticipated
Absolutely.
consequences.
Right.
One might say that, it was really the effort to reform,
Right.
some of our problems today are rooted in efforts to reform Congress from decades ago.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe a question I would have is, how can we sort out, what are reform ideas that are actually going to be helpful from those that will have these unintended consequences? Or
I'm working on an article about misalignment and the number of things that we do to solve a problem that makes it worse because we misunderstood the nature of the problem. So, I get a lot of pushback on all of these. The War Powers Act, I'll use two. The War Powers Act. Presidents had started abusing their power. Truman sending us off to war, without Congress's approval, and then more and more we're getting into military actions that have not been approved by Congress under presidents of both parties. So Congress, in its wisdom, said we're not going to put up with that, and passed the War Powers Act. By God, that now says, remember before the War Powers Act, presidents were not constitutionally allowed to take you into battle. After the War Powers Act, the reform to rein in the president, he now had free rein to do it for 60 days, after which you could come in and try to stop him while your troops are already getting shot at, so nobody's going to turn it off. And that was. So another example, so I spoke to Paul Pearson's class, which has a lot of people who are communications people in it. They don't want to hear it. A lot of people don't want to hear this. In the colonial days, this is how the birth of freedom of the press in America began. John Peter Zenger, who was a publisher in New York, libeled because it was harmful to the governor of New York, appointed by the king, and he had done it. It was against the law to criticize the governor. And so he went to court. And an American jury said, we don't care if he says bad things about it. It was true. And truth is a defense against libel. Now, years later, the Supreme Court gave us New York Times versus Sullivan. What does New York Times versus Sullivan do? It says that if you publish something that is false and that damages the reputation of a person, you don't get any, you can't win a libel suit unless you can prove that they did it maliciously. How do you do that? How do you read people's minds? Well, I know, in Star Wars they had people who could do that, read people's minds, but how do you do that? And so in an attempt to rein in presidents taking to war, we passed a War Powers Act that did the opposite. In protecting freedom of the press, we did something that did the opposite. So the answer to your question is, look, ideas spring to your mind. Why don't we just do this? And you need to back off and say just what you did. What are the possible unintended consequences? What will this really lead to? Instead of getting carried away. So my wife's there thinking that I get carried away with my idea. So, but instead of getting carried away with all of these, stop and work them through and say, always, always question yourself. I tell my students at Princeton, we do this we have debates on all kinds of stuff, and I say, afterwards, write a reflection paper, and what you should be thinking is, what do I believe? Why do I believe it? Is it the right thing to believe? Are there other things I ought to take into consideration? Should I rethink this? and maybe not, but we don't do that. And the more we can do that, we stop these misalignments where we set out to achieve one goal and we end up doing the opposite.
Great, thanks. So we have some questions from the audience. I guess the first one, as a former representative from Oklahoma, what are your thoughts on what's happened with Senator Lankford from the legislature and other Republicans in the state in response to the border, his work on the border bill? And do you feel like this is indicative of where the Republican Party is today in terms of cross-party cooperation?
Yeah, I can't think of a clearer example of that. James Lankford, representing my state, is more conservative than I am, more conservative than I was. And he worked hard. He and Kirsten Sinema worked on that and made that deal happen. That was going to be respectful of the people who were coming into this country, because this country is made of immigrants. Immigrants are the strength of America. And to not demonize them, but also to have, like any country, some control over the inflow into your country so that you don't get overwhelmed, and it has an orderly process. Worked it out and put a lot of effort into it, a very conservative guy. And all that it took was for the presumed presidential candidate of his party to just say, I don't want you to do that, because it'll hurt my campaign, and so everybody turned against him. And Lankford was a victim, caught in the headlines. I mean, nobody saw this coming, and it showed how captive it was. It was not just captive of Trump; it was captive of the destruction of the separation of powers. Because I personally believe, although it hasn't happened, if Joe Biden, Gavin Newsom, anybody, you pick a Democrat, was the Democratic nominee running and asked the Democrats in the Congress not to do something at this point, they would do it. It is the idea that this is our president, we're all one team. We're all one team, and we're not going to block our team. And so it's the cult. And the Lankford example was just terrible, scary as hell to me. And it also shows that the people in Congress think of themselves more now as presidential staff if the president is of their party. And it's destructive. Anyway.
Great, thank you. So we have a question about the role of money in politics. What role do you think it's playing in the current situation? Do you think there are reforms that would improve with respect to the role of money in politics?
There's way too damn much money in politics. So now I'm going to really sound old and old-fashioned, because I'm going to go back to, in my day. But the fact is that when I ran, no person, it didn't make a difference if you were a pauper or you were a zillionaire. Nobody could give you more than $1,000, period. They could give you $1,000 in the primary and $1,000 in a runoff and $1,000 in the general election, but $1,000 was it. The No Political Action Committee could give you more than $5,000, no matter how big it was. No labor union could give you a penny. They couldn't even give you a desk for somebody to sit in your campaign office. Neither could any corporation. The Supreme Court, when they said that corporations are people, they were smoking something that was then illegal. It's probably not illegal now, but what happened is when we let this broad infusion of money, because that's speech, right? That is, then you've created this huge imbalance. It's one reason women don't run more, because they feel like they can't raise the money. They're not in that network, although more and more are doing it now. But it's a real barrier. It's a barrier. And even if you get in, that you can just be overwhelmed by the amount of money that your opponent has. And Now, I got elected as a Republican in a district that was heavily Democratic, running in a primary against a guy who was a millionaire and had the money. And largely, now I only raised $30,000 in my first race, a little more in my second one, but I knocked on a lot of doors because I could do it. I didn't have to compete with all of his millions of dollars because he could only himself into his own race. Even his wife, his kids, nobody could give more than $1,000. And that's gone now. And there needs to be changes. I don't know what they are. I'm not expert on campaign finance reform, but it needs to be reined in. Who runs our country? Who is in the White House? Who is in Congress? Who's in the mayor? Who's a city council member? Should not be determined by who can raise the most money.
So we're getting questions about a lot of the big money and big issues or challenges facing our political system. So somebody's asking, so beyond thinking about changes in election law or how Congress works, how do we get both sides to communicate and discuss issues and eliminate the influence of, or limit the influence of the sort of echo chamber phenomenon on social media and so on?
First of all, in social media, and I'm also going to put some of broadcast media in the same category. I can tell you, I could name several TV channels that I could, right now, today, tell you who's going to be on there, who's going to be on their panel 3 weeks from today and what they're going to say. And in social media, we talked about this in Paul Pearson's class, that it serves a great purpose. You have much more access to information, and a lot of it is false. If I see, Eric, a picture of you tomorrow standing next to the King of England, I would say, Eric is a friend of that. Eric is not a true American. He believes in the British system. Here he's a Brit. He's not. But his picture, I saw his picture. There they were together. We are losing. And I'm not a troglodyte. I mean, I have a cell phone. I have a computer. But we are losing the ability to know truth from falsehood. It's all around us. We can't tell the difference because AI is so good. And on social media, where you don't have to say who you are, you now let all the demons out because you're not answerable. And you can threaten people's lives and you can say all kinds of terrible things about them because there's no price to be paid. So we have actually, it's one thing to have technology as our servant. It's something else to have technology as our master. And that is dangerously close in terms of, now you probably are smart enough, I know you are, and maybe I am, to be able to look at a paper knowing what my students have said all semester long and be able to tell, did they really write this paper or did AI write this paper? But if it's really some question about national security or some other really, really critical, important thing, or something that would destroy a person's life, it matters whether we allow these tech people who believe that the best thing in life is to break everything. They're idiots. They are idiots. And if we allow them to take over and destroy our democracy, it's our fault. So I hope Elon Musk heard that.
Probably are some ways in which they could.
Yeah, I'm sure they probably did. Sorry. I have a cell phone. You probably just heard it.
So actually, maybe just following up on that. So, I mean, one of the big issues going on in Congress now is this question of banning TikTok or forcing divestment.
Right.
It seems like an odd issue in that we have, the rare bipartisan vote in the, in committee in the House, though now it's running into criticism or challenges, and Donald Trump has turned against it. Like, how would you, and also an issue in which a lot of people are weighing into their members of Congress. Members are getting a lot of calls complaining about this. How would you think about an issue like that?
Well, in the case of TikTok, the question is, there's a couple of questions. One is, are you harmed by what's on TikTok? Well, actually, Jonathan Haidt, who's a good friend of mine, a social psychologist, has written a lot about the negative effect on people, especially young women, of social media. And there are concerns about how much time people spend just locked into their phone. We were at something the other day. We were on the plane coming in. Everybody's on their phone. Everybody's on their phone. I'm surprised there are some of you who aren't just sitting there on your phone now. This is what we do. So there are sides to that. But in the case of TikTok, there's something else. It's owned by an adversary country. It would be a real mistake to downplay the threat of what China poses to us. Not that they're going to send their troops over here, but the ways that they are able to invade our space with their technology. It's something, you just can't be blasé about that stuff. And so it's a national security issue. And it's one thing to be afraid of Silicon Valley, and it's something else to be, it's the Chinese who are putting these ideas into our heads and making you believe these things that may not be true. I don't particularly want to be on TikTok because nobody wants to see me dancing, but but anyway, there are foreign policy implications to a lot of this stuff.
Okay, cool.
Oh, and can I add one more thing? Because I just brought it up. I want to mention Ukraine. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet in terms of what's happening is there is for whatever reasons I don't understand, a reluctance to stand in support of democracies under attack by, very aggressive authoritarian governments. And so that's another thing. So anyway. So Christine, who runs everything, is sending signals to Eric.
She sent me
about
a
how much
signal
time.
about 2 minutes. I want to
Right.
ask one last really
Right.
interesting question from the audience. I'm going to amend, well, I'll first read it, and then it took
Okay.
me a second to get the significance, but then I thought it was really interesting. So how do you interpret the practice of supporting simultaneous truths? I live my truth, therefore they should live theirs, or everybody has their truth. But what if, in other words, we should be open to all different, everybody should express their ideas and views, but what if somebody's truth that they want to voice is at the expense of others, or denying the kind of equal status of others, right? How do we think about tolerance or in that kind of context?
Stop calling it a truth. It's a belief. It's an opinion. It's so easy to fall back and say, this is what I was raised to believe. This is what, my parents told me to do. This is what my church told me to do. This is whatever, so this is my truth. Or you've got lived experience. Other people in your situation may have had similar lived experience or a different lived experience. It's not your truth. It's your experience. It's what you saw. It is what your belief is, but that does not give you the right to take away somebody else's right to their own different belief and truth. I will tell you that more harm has been done in this world by religious wars, by true believers, true believer A against true believer B. And we need a little humility. We need a little bit of understanding that we don't have all truth in our head, that there are other points of view, and that we should greet each other as fellow human beings, fellow Americans, but fellow human beings, and care for each other. And if that person's truth is different than your truth, embrace them. and say, we'll go forward together.
Well, on that note, I want to thank Congressman Edwards. Great. And I want to, just before we leave, I want to first thank the IGS staff for their wonderful work putting this event together. And echoing Congressman Edwards, Christine Trost